and welcome to AppSec Decoded. I'm Taylor Armerding, security advocate with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group, and this is the second of several conversations focusing on threat modeling. And joining me again to help with that is Christopher Cummings, principal consultant at Synopsys, who is a co-author of a recent white paper on the topic. So Chris, welcome. And thanks to you and your fellow authors once again for a paper that our viewers can download for free at synopsys.com. The series is covering the 5 major steps in creating a useful threat model, which are scoping, data gathering. Those 2 we covered in the previous episode. Today, we're going to be talking about system model, and then the other 2 are attack model and risk analysis. The overall goal of threat modeling is to help organizations understand the threats they face, which then helps them address those threats more intentionally and efficiently. So today, step 3, the creation of a system model. You say this step begins with software. Tell us about that and why.
Well, thank you, Taylor. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate you having allow us to dive into threat modeling. Again, I'd like to acknowledge a few of the team members and colleagues that helped make this white paper possible. We have Sergio Santos, Lee Zhao, and Dan Marvin Gluba. We appreciate that and their commitment to making this paper a success. So jumping into why software, reconnecting us back to the conversation we had a little bit earlier about the 4 main approaches, this allows us to dive into a software-centric approach, right? And so we start to be able to answer the question of what does this system do? In the scoping section, we talked a bit about drawing a box, right, around an area that we want to focus on. Now that we understand that box, we want to dive into the details about what is actually happening in that box. And the software approach is going to give us the best view of what that actually may be like. So when we think about that, what the software approach does, it allows us to understand the components in the system, what technologies are being used, what frameworks are being used, how those technologies are communicating with each other and leveraging each other. So that really helps us draw a picture of how data flows from one component to another. And as we'll talk a little bit later, what controls or assets may exist, but honing in on understanding what the system does, how it actually operates and what technology is in place is really key to understanding what's in that box as a primary vehicle for the future conversations and analysis that we'll do.
You have said other components, which you mentioned, include data assets, security controls, and trust boundaries. So talk just a bit about the significance of each of those in building the system model.
Yeah, so without diving into too much detail on each of them, I think the big point there is with data assets, security controls, and trust boundaries, it gives us a holistic view of the system and what the system's doing, the things we need to protect, and how we're actually protecting them, right? So a data asset, as an example, might be a password, right? And then a control might be, hashing of that password or something like that. And so that might prevent certain types of attacks. So as we look at the diagram and identify those assets, controls, and boundaries visually, we can start to communicate in a simple language to other readers and other users what the system looks like, where we might want to attack or where we might want to perceive some analysis. So those 3 items or those 3 elements are key to understanding at least the security aspect of what a system does.
And then the paper says the team creates a simplified diagram of the system model that highlights all the in-scope components, as well as the connections and their protocols, plus security annotations. How do you determine what to include in the diagram?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's kind of highly debated here as well. The big thing, as I alluded to in the paper, is building clear and concise diagrams is an art. We provided a step-by-step guide in how we try to approach it, from taking something relatively high level to something a little bit more detailed. But communicating complexity can be difficult. And sometimes I'll just give a couple examples, right? So we might talk about a mobile application. And so understanding that a mobile application is a single device, that single device may actually have components within it, right? Maybe there is a TPM or trusted processing module, right? Or there's another data storage location, or maybe there's a certificate that is being handled on that device. You might want to identify those, but only if you're focusing on reviewing the mobile device. If you're looking at maybe services, you don't need to worry about the device. So I think the big thing here that we try to identify and talk about understanding what to put on there, take a look back at the scoping section. What things are priority? Where's the risk focus? If we want to focus on services, then your components should probably be more service oriented. If we're dealing with an embedded system or embedded device, we might want to focus on the bootloader and the processing on that device itself. So the types of components that you can illustrate are endless, but making sure that you're communicating a clear message with the components that you're choosing is the important part there. So I'd say to answer that in a less obscure way is it's up to the person creating the diagram to choose what's there, but making sure that you choose the things that the end users or the consumers of the report or the diagram will actually understand and hone in on that message is really key. Right.
All right, last question for this segment. As you collect all of that information, do you update the diagram? Is the diagram updated? And how do you maintain a diagram? And is it ever done? And if so, how do you know when it's done?
Yeah. So there's a couple of schools of thought here, right? So I can break it down into, a point in time assessment versus an iterative assessment or iterative review process. When we think about, our jobs as consultants, we typically look at a point in time assessment. So, we're done after we've identified and documented all the things that are in scope. But if you're talking about an in-house group that's actually building security as a part of the development process, that document should actually live within the organization, and you should be updating it as new features are released, as new controls and as new assets are identified there. So in theory, the threat model diagram should start, even prior to the diagramming phase. Once you start scoping the system, you have an understanding of the high level picture. So draw something down that represents that. And as you start interviewing folks and collecting more information, hone in on those details and refine that. As you hear new things, use the diagram representation to aid in your interviews and conversations to say, hey, we believe that system A talks to system B through this protocol. Is that correct? If you need a different answer, you can then modify and update that. And then make sure that that diagram lives with the development or engineering team or even a security team. So as things arise and things come up, you can go back and change that and modify the attack surfaces or modify the threats that you might consider. So long story short, the diagram should never be done. But focusing iterative changes on the scope as that scope changes. Maybe you're focusing on functionality 1, and then you're looking at functionality 2. You now know that functionality 1 and functionality 2 are part of that bigger system. So all those things that you identify can be useful to you in the future.
Great. It does sound like something that's never done, but it's well worth well worth keeping up with. All right, and we're going to leave it there for now. Thanks, Chris, for helping us through step 3, and thanks to you, our audience, for joining us. We hope you'll keep an eye out for our next conversation, which will focus on using the information gathered through the system model and scope, etc., to create an attack model. And remember, you can find our previous segments on threat modeling and download the white paper for free at Synopsys.com. Until then, I'm Taylor Armerding with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group. We help organizations build trust into their software.